Today, we're going to be speaking with Mitchell Green, who's a professor of philosophy at the University of Connecticut and also author of the book, Know Thyself, The Value and Limits of Self-Knowledge. I really appreciate having you on today. Looking forward to this.
Thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, when it comes to self-knowledge, we've talked before, and as often happens in political circles, invariably the concept of Dunning-Kruger comes up, the idea that sometimes we lack the cognitive ability to notice when we are not fully equipped to understand or explain something. Some of the self-knowledge you talk about in the book is less about maybe factual shortcomings we may have, but more about the idea of really knowing ourselves in a societal context, in the context of, well, I know what I'm like in social situations. Is that really me, or is there something else? Talk a little bit about this concept and what might be some of the limiting factors on our ability to really know ourselves.
Okay, I'll try. I guess there are a couple things that come to mind here that might be helpful. One of which is we have something like an immune system, but an immune system that is at the more psychological level than the biological, in the sense that there's a lot of mental effort that goes into protecting our images of ourselves, the narratives we tell about our lives and how we fit in a social context, the sort of stories that we tell about who we are and why we are the way we are difficult to puncture, difficult to find evidence that contradicts or undermines them, because sometimes that contradiction or undermining can be painful. And so we've got a strong, I guess I'd say, vested interest that's difficult to recognize in keeping the story we tell about ourselves consistent, coherent, and so forth. However, sometimes when we're interested in finding more about ourselves, we've got to be ready to accept some difficult truths about why, for example, why we do the things that we do. So, for example, someone who goes to a social situation like a party and says and finds themselves not wanting very much to socialize with others and explains that by saying that they're shy. In my experience, that might be a reason, but there might be other reasons, at least behind the apparent shyness, that help account for why the person behaves the way they do, such as that they've got a certain self-image that they don't want to risk being challenged by meeting people for the first time and responding to their reactions to them. So if I tell myself that I'm a certain kind of person, I meet someone new, they might reflect back a very different picture of myself from the one that I tend to carry around. And then that their reflection of it might be a challenging experience for me, in which case I might have an interest without consciously acknowledging that fact, an interest in keeping to myself in some sense and only superficially interacting with others. So putting yourself in a social way out there makes you a little bit vulnerable. One way in which it makes you vulnerable is that it might allow other people to, so to speak, puncture your self-image, which is a difficult thing to accept, difficult thing to hear, difficult thing to process. So I would say many of us have an interest in avoiding those types of potentially challenging situations. That would be one way in which we, I would say, have difficulty getting a good, clear, dry-eyed view of who we are and why we behave the way that we do. That's just an example kind of thing that I think is not enough of a part of the public discourse about understanding ourselves. It seems to me in the last maybe 10 or 15 years, on the whole and in general, with plenty of exceptions, people your or my age seem a bit more interested in learning about themselves, achieving some kind of self-knowledge or self-understanding than was in the past. But I think many of us have difficulty knowing what exactly we're looking for, what we count as gaining that self-knowledge. And in many ways, I think we don't have the terminology for understanding and talking about the sorts of concepts and phenomena that we're after. And that's what a large part of the book is about, to try to equip readers with some of those concepts, some of those terms to help them make progress in that journey.
It seems that in society, there are all sorts of places where we get ideas about who we might be. And obviously, capitalism and a system of consumption that relates to products and services and how we identify with those and what they mean about us if we drive a certain car or whatever the case may be, that certainly seems to be a big part of this. In the political space, there's a lot of usage of you're pro-family, right? And what do they mean by that? What do we think it says about us to say yes, I'm pro-family or not? With this Lauren Boebert situation over the last week, what it means to be pro-family has certainly kind of been upended. It seems as though is it fair to say that all of these different sources can interfere with figuring out who we, quote, truly are? Or is who we truly are quite literally sort of guided by these external sources to some degree?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would go for the first option for the most part, with a little bit of room for some factoring into the second option as well. I say the second option, that is, who we are can sometimes be guided by what choices we make, because there's, in my view at least, no one fixed essence that is at the bottom of each person that maintains constancy throughout a lifetime. There's a certain amount of plasticity in our personalities. And so if you start doing something new, because, for example, you got convinced to try a new product or a new lifestyle involving product that you hadn't tried before, you might surprise yourself and really love it. And that might change what you were doing. I was just, for example, on a bike ride this morning here in the beautiful fall weather here in New England, and was noticing that it was about 15 years ago since I started riding fairly seriously a road bike. And I'm so happy that I found it. I wouldn't have expected before I did so, before 2008, that I would enjoy it as much as I ended up doing. So sometimes buying a good product, like a nice road bike and so forth, can make a big difference to your life and help shape the person you are. However, there are other ways in which capitalism can convince us that we should be a certain way, and in so doing, make things more difficult and perhaps get us off course. So another example, sort of sporting goods, is a difficult experience for me is to go to a sporting goods store and say, I think I want to be the kind of person who can do technical rock climbing as is depicted in this wonderful wall at REI or something like that, and be tempted to get all the products. The problem is, as a matter of fact, I'm not enough of a risk taker to want to do any serious kind of technical climbing. And so I could spend huge amounts of money on such a thing and then let it all sit in my garage and collect dust for years.
When it comes to, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Without might be able to admit that the thing I chose that I wanted to do was something that doesn't square with my personality and what the things that I like and dislike and so forth. So I think there's a kind of balance between, on the one hand, one extreme is only doing things that are sure that you like, or avoiding things that you're sure you don't like, and just staying within a kind of groove. Sometimes trying something that's a bit outside of your comfort zone and so forth can help modify our personality, and in so doing, help us learn more about ourselves. So I'm often telling my students when I teach this course, Know Thyself, that one good way to find out who you are is to try things that are novel, that are unexpected, that are outside of your normal range of experience, and see what happens, see how your reactions are. And it might be that in many cases, you don't find those new activities all that satisfying or enjoyable, but all you need is a couple that you fall in love with, and you can make a huge difference in your life over the long term. So I guess I'd say there's a certain amount of balance, but I would also say, particularly in a capitalist economy, there's a constant danger of being convinced by marketing, for example, that what you really need in order to achieve happiness is X. Let X be that fancy car, or that super, lovely vacation, or a bigger house than you already have, or billions of other things. And we can often be led off course in the journey of sort of finding out who we are by such temptation.
I'm very interested in getting your thoughts on, I guess this sort of relates to dualism, but it's really kind of like a bodily continuity sort of question. Mm-hmm. In science fiction for a very long time now, there has been the idea of humans continuing to live by transferring their consciousness to some kind of technical element, and then either existing in a computer, or in Richard K. Morgan's book, Altered Carbon, which was turned into a miniseries or a series on Netflix. The idea is your consciousness is contained in a device that goes in your spine, and you can simply move that to another body, and then your consciousness continues. So one of the things I've thought about is, even if the technology existed to upload our entire consciousness and memory as of the moment you do it to some technical device, mm-hmm. and put it in another body or exist in the cloud, to other people, it might seem like it is your consciousness continuing uninterrupted from that day. But to the person who's having it done, doesn't it split at that point? And from the moment that the upload takes place, you and that upload diverge and start having different experiences? Like, I don't think I would live forever if that happened. I think others might see what they remember my consciousness being continuing, but I don't think I would experience that.
Right. Right. Good question. So this is a topic known as the metaphysics of uploading, and it's gained a lot of philosophical interest in the last 10, 15, 20 years. I guess I would say it's one thing to upload a lot of information that is stored in your central nervous system onto a server. Maybe that's something a person would be attempting to do before they pass away. Suppose they've been found that they've discovered they've got a life-threatening disease. They want to, in some sense, preserve themselves.
Yeah.
I would say it's an open question that I think no one knows how to answer, whether or not, even if they could successfully upload all the information in the central nervous system, whether the new thing would, in any sense, preserve a consciousness that was there before. And so, getting at your question, it seems likely that if we get the technology right, and some Mitchell Green whose neural information is loaded up into a server somewhere and then downloaded with the help of a 3D flesh printer or something like that, a body, and then imported into that body, that person would go around saying, "Hi, I'm Mitch,"
Right.
and would behave as if he's the same person as was existing up until 2023, for example. You're also right to say there's a problem with deciding whether that's true from a subjective or first personal point of view. But I would just say, notice that if, as I go into a special booth, for example, to have my brain information uploaded and then my body presumably destroyed to avoid confusions about who the real Mitch Green is, I might be knocked unconscious before this process starts. So there wouldn't be any experience of any moment which I'm experiencing the end of me, so to speak. I would just become unconscious. And then the new person, Mitch Green Prime or Mitch Green Star, who goes around calling himself Mitch Green, would say that, "Oh yeah, that's me. Yeah, I remember that interview that I taught, that I had with David Pakman and so forth. That was great fun, et cetera, et cetera." But there's a further question whether or not that person, even though they seem to remember experiencing that thing that they did, whether or not they in fact remember. So philosophers,
would the you that was in your body experience a continuity? And it doesn't seem like the answer is yes.
Well, what's subtle here, what's fussy, is that they would probably, if in fact the uploading and downloading went well, they would be able to stay there. Let's suppose that things get frozen for a year just to make sure things are clear. So in 2024, September 2024, this information that was up in the server gets downloaded to a body, and that person starts walking around saying, "Hi, Mitch, I'm back," and so forth. Notice that they would say, "I remember that interview I gave with David Pakman. I remember the bike ride I went on that morning," and so forth. And so one of the most famous theories of personal identity over time, that's due to John Locke, the philosopher John Locke, is based on these ideas of memory links. And what's challenging about that theory, even though it's very attractive, is that it's difficult to tell the difference between genuine memories, in which there's a causal connection, a direct causal connection, in which the person is preserved, and so-called apparent memories, or sometimes philosophers will call them quasi-memories. And you can think of cases like this. Suppose that there was something that you did as a kid. Maybe you dropped something and made a mess when you were 3 years old or something. You don't actually have a direct recollection of it, but your siblings and parents have told you that story so many times that it's just you convince yourself that you remember that experience.
Well, this reminds me of the stuff I've read about solipsism, which is today I remember what I did yesterday. I can't be sure I did it. All I know is today I have the memory of it, and how that memory came to be in my mind could be a number of different ways. It could be because I really did the thing, or because someone put the memory there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's not quite the same as solipsism, I would say. Solipsism is a view about the existence of other minds than my own. So if I'm a solipsist, I'm going to say I've got doubts about whether there's any other consciousness than the consciousness that inheres in Mitchell Green. The kind of skepticism that you're thinking about is what you might call memorial skepticism. That is whether or not my memories are genuinely reflect something that happened before. Bertrand Russell, for example, famously considered the possibility that as I wake up one morning at 7 a.m., maybe all the what seem like memories that are in my mind were just put there by some deceiving demon or something like that. How can I be sure that that's not the case? That's a slightly different issue, I would say, but it does raise the question whether or not, even if we're sure, I feel pretty sure I'm not subject to doubt about whether or not, in fact, I went for a bike ride this morning. I'm not subject to doubt as to whether or not I woke up at the time that I did this morning. But we can have doubts about whether the future so-called Mitch Green, after that uploading and downloading, is actually the same person or just thinks that he is. And it's very difficult to say. However, here's another way of thinking about the thought experiment that you considered that I think lends some support to your perspective on it. Namely, suppose that you were given the option of going into this machine that would first read all your brain information, then cause your body to be destroyed, save all the brain information, download it to a body. Now, here's one way of asking you the question, which is one that I often ask my students. Would you be willing to go into that machine? Many of us, I think I would say, well, I think that would be called dying. That is,
Well, I guess the
that
question is, what do you mean by you don't mean put my physical body into the machine, right? So in a sense, what is it that it mean? What does it mean to go into the machine?
I mean, go into the machine. I mean, put your physical body in the machine. Here's the thought experiment. Thought experiment is I'm going to go bodily into the machine, and then there will be a device that will, a future super MRI type of thing that scans my central nervous system, collects all the information from it, all the synaptic connections, so forth, which presumably underlie my memories and my thoughts and my beliefs and so forth, and then upload it to a server. And now, in order to avoid confusion, this body has to be destroyed.
Mm.
Okay. And what I'm suggesting now is, even if I was confident that there would be a future individual called Mitch Green who'd walk around, who'd say, I remember that interview with David Beckham, et cetera,
Yeah.
that would be not me. That would be someone who's just very, very similar to me. And what's my evidence for that? My evidence for that is that intuitively, from a first person point of view, most of us would say, I think most of us would say, that if faced with the prospect of going into that machine in the conditions I described, I'm going to have my brain uploaded, brain information uploaded, and then my body is going to be destroyed. That is my death.
I agree with that.
And insofar as you agree with that, what you're saying is that uploading does not preserve personal identity, or some people would say, as you put it, uploading does not preserve consciousness. There might be good reasons to do it. I mean, if, for example, if I've got a fatal disease and I want there to be some record of who I am, who I was, the sort of life I lived, I might not mind having there be a representative,
right,
who'd be able to do the things, teach my classes and write the things I hope to publish in the next 20 years and still hang out with my friends and so forth. But that would be a representative or a proxy for me, would not be me. That's the idea.
That's my idea as well.
Okay,
so let's, we'll end our conversation on that note. And of course, this is my view, subject to revision, always, I like to say.
That's right.
We've been speaking with Professor of Philosophy, Mitchell Green. The book is Know Thyself, The Value and Limits of Self-Knowledge. I really appreciate your time and insights today.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure speaking with you.